Welcome, everybody, to The Single Point, a division of the Rouge Radio podcast where we go one-on-one with a special guest and we dedicate our time, as we said, going one-on-one with a special guest and continuing on with our 9 teams in 9 weeks. We go to La Belle Province, and no better to come on the show again, one half of the co-host of the Alouette Flight Deck podcast, Cliffy D. Cliff, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
I don't realize until like how long it's been, but when I pull up Skype, not a lot of people know that we do this via Skype, but I added you to the conversation and it said we haven't chatted for like 3 years. I'm like, oh my God, that's how long it's been. And back to regular normalcy, CFL football after the 14 game shenanigans that we had after a canceled season. It's good to be back. First off, Cliff, we hyped your return to the podcast last week, and we got an email. And the email says, "What's the over/under of Cliffy bashing Trevor Harris?" And internally, I'm thinking maybe we'll put it on maybe 4.5. So now's your chance to how. I guess not mad, but how much of a kind of disappointment that you realize that once they released Trevor Harris that they kind of re-signed him?
Well, my first thought was, thank goodness they released him, because otherwise they would have been on the hook for a $300K bonus, and that would have been a very, very difficult pill to swallow. I had to laugh, though, because I was doing the CF Countdown show on free agency day. I jumped on and spent some time with them. And it was hilarious because after I logged off, I spent most of the time actually talking about Trevor Harris. I'm like, he'd be a great backup for, say, one of the more established teams, at least, as far as like the quote unquote insurance policy goes. Never in a million years did I think that Montreal would re-sign him like an hour later. I'm like, wow. Okay, then. Like, my first thought too was like, is it April 1st already? But
it might as well. It's a CFL. You never know.
But lo and behold, he's back and apparently willing to accept a backup role, willing to accept a $125,000 contract. I'm like, okay, well, look, I'll be honest. As far as I'm concerned, and I stand behind this 100%, this is Vernon Adams' football team, and no one's going to take it from him, barring injury or something catastrophic happening to him. But now that Trevor Harris is back in the fold, so to speak, I'm curious to see just what he can do as far as like having a full off season to prepare and be ready. And now that he knows what environment he's in, he's had a taste of it last year. So I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens when training camp starts.
What is the environment, the quarterback environment of Montreal right now? Because you lost Matthew Schultz as he wanted a little bit more of a bigger role outside of Montreal. You signed Dominique Davis. With the expectation that Trevor Harris was going to be released. Now you brought back Trevor Harris. Is there kind of like, is there in fact role that Trevor Harris will in fact be the backup quarterback, or did they just quietly release Dominique Davis and nobody really cared?
Well, if they released Dominique Davis, it would be quite the surprise because he was actually at this mini camp that Vernon Adams held for his offensive units. So that would be definitely news to me. And I think in not so many ways, the fact that Davis was invited to this camp and Harris wasn't, I don't think it was a case necessarily of Vernon Davis holding a grudge against Trevor Harris. I don't think he's like that at all, to tell you the honest truth. I just think it was a matter of who he thought he'd be actually truly working with in 2022. And I guess for whatever reason, he seems to think a little bit more of Davis being a better fit as far as a backup goes versus Harris. But again, we won't know this entirely until training camp gets underway, but it does make for a very interesting dynamic as far as how Vernon Adams sees this football team.
The CFL draft, or the CFL held its annual draft last week. The Montreal Alouettes made a couple of trades. They moved up to number 1 overall, and they moved again with the trade with Winnipeg to move again another pick into the first round. What's the expectations with the 2 first-round picks and first overall Tyrel Richards and the 9th overall pick, Tyson Philpott.
Well, Richards, as everybody knows, he was like the consensus number one pick on all the mock drafts, and a lot of the CFL draft experts were highly touting Richards' ability. And again, it seemed like it was going to be a done deal. He'd be going to Edmonton, but lo and behold, Danny Machocha clearly saw something he liked in this guy and made the moves in order to get him as the first overall pick. I was very surprised and pleasantly surprised, actually. I think Richards will be an immediate impact for this football team. He'll get a chance to play with guys like Chris Aki and Brian Harlamana, who was also a draft pick in 2020 for the Alouettes. I think these are some of the young linebackers that are going to really make an impact, and the fact that they're national players too just makes a good thing even better as far as I'm concerned. In addition, with Tyson Philpott, I was a little surprised, but maybe I shouldn't have been, considering the Alouettes made moves to really focus on the national receiver position. They signed Hergy Mayala in free agency. They've already got Kion Julian Grant and Rashawn Simonides, who are also both national players. So it seems like the focus is they're going to try to have a Canadian receiver on the field as much as possible. So in which case, why wouldn't you add a Tyson Philpott to the mix? And from what I've seen, he's been an exceptionally fantastic football player along with his twin brother. I guess only time will tell too whether we got the better of the two Philpott brothers, but just the fact that we've got one of these guys in camp is going to make things very interesting as far as the receiver position goes.
So over the years, like these last couple of years, I've been a big booster of the Montreal Alouettes, kind of implying they're going to turn the corner. We're going to see the old Alouettes team of the 2000s, late 90s, what have you, rise up and dominate the East. And they haven't really backed up my support. So for you being closer to the club, what's kind of your expectations? Were you agreeing with me that this team's on the rise and still trending, or they might have looked good, but they could be plateauing? What's a realistic expectation? If I'm an Alouettes fan and we're talking over a beer or something, what would you tell me is a realistic expectation for this club?
I think what we saw in 2019 was an anomaly. It was something that wasn't expected to happen, but my goodness, it made things really exciting. And of course, with the lost 2020 season, a lot of people were wondering, can the Alouettes maintain that momentum? And I think for the most part they had when 2021 got underway, and things kind of plateaued a little bit once Vernon Adams got injured and Trevor Harris was summoned to duty. At that point, it didn't seem like it was the same team quite at all. I wouldn't say they were in a bad way, but at the same time, like they were kind of coasting a little bit as far as the good momentum they had built, and kind of just sort of backed themselves into the playoffs and then ended up in the same position that they were in 2019, losing in the first round, which is disappointing because, again, the thought was, okay, this is more or less the same team, but you know, they still got the same coaching staff for the most part, and they've added a few interesting pieces. Like, this is a team that should have gone further than what they did, and they didn't. So as far as 2022 goes, I got that general consensus during the offseason that the goal was to keep as much of the core elements in place, which I think they've done a very good job of doing. The pieces that have been added to this roster have been very pleasant surprises, and ones that I think will actually work very well. Cap all that off with a very, very solid draft as far as I'm concerned. And I really think this Alouettes team is putting the pieces together in order to become a team that will go past the first round. So that's my expectation for them as far as 2022 goes, is to be better than just good enough to get into the playoffs and then do nothing with it. Like, I expect this team to be at least in the Eastern Final, whether they're the first team in the East or the second or even the third, and then somehow manage to get into the Eastern Final. I expect this football team to be better than it was and better than it's shown in 2021.
You mentioned the anomaly. Is it safe to say that maybe the feeling around Montreal is, you know, it's almost as if the Alouettes didn't even make the playoffs in 2021?
In some respects, because Vernon Adams didn't play, and I think, like as I said, this is pretty much his football team. He was not perfect in 2021 by any stretch of the imagination. There was a lot of times where he played lights out football, and then other times where he did not. And call it a sophomore jinx as a starter, call it whatever you will. But I think this really is his football team. And I think he realizes that as well. And he realizes what has to be done as far as him being a leader on this team. And I think he's taken the steps in order to prove that and show that he has that leadership capability. So I think if he stays healthy this year, I think he's going to make sure that everybody understands and realizes that this is very much a real football team, and they just have to realize that potential within themselves.
Speaking of fan favorites, the head coach, Kahari Jones, was rumored as of I don't know if it was a couple days ago or at least a week or two ago, there were reports that he is on the hot seat. What's the expectation with Kahari Jones? What if the Montreal Alouettes come out of the gate 0-5? Is there an expectation that maybe they want a new voice on the sidelines in Montreal?
I think by and large, the players still have his back because he's had their back for so long. I want to believe that these guys want to play for Kahari Jones. I have a hard time believing that he's lost them in any ways. Obviously, he didn't do quite as well in 2021 as he did in 2019, but I think that's to be, you almost have to take last year as a mulligan as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it kind of doesn't count because it wasn't quite a 100% CFL season as we've come to expect. This year is supposed to be with a full 18-game schedule and so on. Is Kahari on the hot seat? I think there's definitely pressure on him. I'm reluctant to say hot seat, if only because I know what kind of a coach he is. I know what he's capable of doing. I think we've seen what he's been able to accomplish. And realistically, if he's got the right players in place and the moves that have been made during the offseason are going to matter like I think they should, I think, barring something, again, going 0-4, the pressure will be on for sure. But if he goes, say, 1-3 or 2-2, I think they're still going to give him the benefit of the doubt as far as I'm concerned. And if he goes 4-0 to start the season, well, then all this is just going to be just talk, just scuttlebutt as far as I'm concerned.
All right, so something a little bit lighter here. What do you think of the Montreal Alouettes' new buckets, the new helmets? Do you like how they cleaned it up and they've gone away from that whole full helmet logo? Play fashionista for us here. You
know what? I said this on the podcast last week was I don't hate it, but I'm kind of disappointed because at least the previous incarnation of this helmet was original and really stood out from all the other ones. Like now I just find the new helmet, if you will, there's no difference between that and any other helmet in the CFL. Like I like the fact that the Alouettes were at least trying to think outside the box and be a little bit original with their design. And now it's just like, okay, well, it's just like any other helmet you find on any other team in North America. Like I like the fact that they were being original, and now it's just kind of cookie cutter. Like, okay, like I don't hate it. Don't get me wrong. I understand why they did it. I'm sure there was a lot of cost cutting measures. And if you ever wanted to do like a retro game, then yeah, it's obviously easier to peel off a sticker versus having to deal with a helmet that was kind of like with the logo painted on, which is what it was before. Mm-hmm. So I get why they made this switch, but at the same time, I don't know. I just felt like it was like, you're just making change for the sake of change. And I'm not a big fan of that. Like,
and I understand what you're saying too. Yeah, I understand what you're saying too, because I felt the same way about the BC Lions when they went really off the grid with that helmet design they had a few years back, and I just loved it. Finally, it was someone taking a chance, and then we just went back to side logos again on the helmet. So I definitely understand where you're coming from with that comment.
Yeah, like to me, it's like, okay, like I'm all for original. I'm all for trying new stuff and seeing how it works. And I kind of get why you'd want to have the side logos and all that. And as I said, there's probably tons of cost cutting measures or just, financial reasons for making a move like this. But to me, I can't help but feel like this was just change for the sake of change.
A quick question here in regards to, I guess, regarding free agency, because the Alouettes seem to be kind of quiet on the Western Front, so to speak, in free agency. Is there someone that really jumped out of you that the Alouettes acquired that you just can't wait to see what they could do this upcoming season?
Without question, I think Hergy Maela is going to be an impact player for the Alouettes. I think when I saw him in Calgary, I thought he definitely was he definitely had a role and he suited it very well. He kind of fell off a little bit in 2021, but I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that Bo Levi was dinged up quite a bit, so maybe they weren't able to connect the way that they should have. And now he's back home, so to speak, because he's a Montreal native, so now he gets a chance to play for the hometown team. And I got a feeling that he and Vernon Adams are going to make some major connections, and I think they're really going to get the fans out of their seats. So I'm really excited to see what Hergy can do for the Alouettes.
There we go. And one last question, unless Tony has one. The Alouettes, obviously, notwithstanding the draft day trades that they made, they also made a very significant trade with sending Tony Washington to Edmonton in exchange for Mike Moore, with the added trade moving up in the draft and with the free agencies acquisitions. Is there more of a more leaning towards that there needs to be an improvement on the defensive side? Because that seems to be where the Alouettes coaching staff has kind of made the adjustments and acquisitions.
Without question. Like they took a lot of hits in free agency as far as the defense goes. And I look at the current defensive unit now, and there's a lot of young guys that I think are going to be asked to step up and make that move to the next level. And quite frankly, it's going to be sink or swim for these guys. Like, they've got talent, and it's just a matter of now you're getting the opportunity to show what you can do. And I think that's going to make a huge difference. And honestly, I think this defensive unit, not perfect, but I definitely see some good young pieces there. And now they've got like a little bit extra years worth of experience and a little bit more seasoning. I'm really curious to see, like, when I go to training camp this year, I will definitely paying a lot of attention to the defense, because I think the secondary was good for the most part last year, but definitely had a lot of holes. I'm curious to see if those holes have now been plugged up, if the defensive line can still hold up and still be as dominant as it was throughout the year. And of course, now with the addition of Tyrel Richards, this linebacking core, which at first was looking a little bit thin, I definitely now think if with him in the picture, if he can live up to the hype, if he can live up to the expectations that have been set forth for him, it's going to make for a very fun defense. Although, like all three assets of the defense are going to look, I think, very interesting, and I'm excited to see what these guys can do.
All right, there we go. And final question, as we always do when we do these season previews. Cliff, last year the Montreal Alouettes finished 7-7. What is your honest-to-God prediction of the Alouettes? Where will they finish in the Eastern Division? And bonus points, brownie points, if you could nail down the exact season record.
I don't think 10-8 is out of the question, quite frankly, because I take a look at what's going on in the East. Ottawa has made some major wholesale changes, so they're not the same team as they were last year. Toronto and Hamilton, they're still making moves. They're still trying to, like, those are two teams you definitely cannot keep out of the picture. But I think all the teams in the East are going to improve. I think they'll all be a lot better. But I think Montreal they've got the talents, as far as I'm concerned, to go at least 10-8 and be either second or third in the division. And I do fully expect them to make it to the Eastern final at least. They've got to get past that hump. They got to get past this Eastern semifinal if they're playing in it. So unless somehow they manage to win the division, which is not out of the question either, but I think 10-8 is a reasonable expectation for this team, and to be in the Eastern final, whether they're hosting or participating, that's pretty much where I've set the benchmark for this team this year.
There we go. All right, perfect. Before we let you go, Cliff, where can our listeners, I'm assuming that they don't even already listen to you already, but where can they find the Alouette Flight Deck podcast?
Your best bet is always to go to www.alouettesflightdeck.ca, or pretty much any major platform you can find a podcast on. You'll find the Alouettes Flight Deck just by searching Alouettes Flight Deck. And you can also listen to the podcast on YouTube as well. Make sure, once again, you check out by going Alouette's Flight Deck on YouTube. Hopefully we're going to get that URL pretty soon, so feel free to subscribe, give us a like, and always give us a follow on Twitter at AlouettesFLDeck.
I love it how he just tells our listeners to subscribe already. That's awesome.
Listen, we need the love. We need the subs, folks.
Yeah.
And hey, we're actually giving away a retro satin jacket once we hit 100 subscribers. So I mean, by all means, folks, like, come over, subscribe, give us a like, show us the love, and who knows, maybe we'll be walking away with some pretty killer swag.
There we go. There's always some incentive for going on YouTube. Again, Cliffy D from the Alouette Flight Deck podcast. Thanks again for staying up late on Mother's Day, notwithstanding. Thanks again for coming on the show, and looking forward to maybe talking to you in the 2022 season. And good luck to you and the Montreal Alouettes.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.